Red and blue lights flashing across my private lake. 6 a.m. Cops at my door because I dared to fish on my own property. I'm Sebastian, a disabled veteran. 30 minutes ago, I was signing a $6.8 million deal. Alpine Resort was buying my grandfather's water rights, the land he fought to protect, the money meant to save my parents from cancer debt. Then Vivian Blackwood, HOA president and neighborhood tyrant, dialed 911. "Trespasser with dangerous weapons," she sneered. Officer Ramirez approaches, hat in hand. "Sorry, sir, complaint about illegal fishing." My phone lights up. Alpine Resort. "Deal off. Can't proceed with active police matter." $6.8 million. Vanished because of one jealous phone call. Vivian stands on her balcony, filming my humiliation, smirking like she's won. She has no clue what she just awakened. My grandfather didn't just leave me the lake. He left me the power to bury her entire precious HOA. This isn't a dispute. This is war, and it's about to cost them everything. Where are you watching from? Drop your city below. The revenge starts now. Let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started. I'm a 38-year-old disabled veteran trying to make an honest living on my grandfather's 200-acre ranch in Pine Valley, Colorado. This place used to be nothing but ranchers and common sense, but over the past decade, it's become infected with wealthy California retirees who think cows are aesthetically challenging. I inherited this land after Grandpa passed 3 years ago, right when I got medically discharged from the Army. IED took my left leg below the knee in Afghanistan, but gave me something priceless: appreciation for wide-open spaces and the kind of peace you can only find when entitled neighbors aren't calling cops on your fishing rod. The ranch isn't just my job, it's my therapy. Every morning at 5 a.m., I'm out there with my cattle, breathing in that mix of pine needles and wildflowers that screams freedom. The rough bark of fence posts under my palms, the sound of cattle bells echoing across morning mist. It keeps PTSD nightmares quieter than any VA prescription ever did. There's something about the smell of hay and honest dirt that makes the world make sense again. My parents live in the main house now. Dad's fighting prostate cancer with treatments that cost more than most people's cars. Mom's battling stage 3 breast cancer with $8,000 monthly chemo bills that would make a loan shark weep. Insurance covers maybe 60% if we're lucky. The ranch feeds about 30 local restaurants with grass-fed beef, and those weekend farmers market sales barely keep us above water. Every dollar matters when cancer's eating your family alive from the inside out. That Alpine deal wasn't about luxury cars or vacation homes. It was about keeping my parents from choosing between medication and groceries. $6.8 million would have covered their treatments for life, paid off the ranch mortgage completely, and let me honor Grandpa's legacy without watching my family die slowly from medical debt that grows faster than we can pay it. Enter Vivian Blackwood, the human equivalent of a homeowners association fever dream. Picture someone who's never worked a real day in her life, but somehow became an expert on how everyone else should live theirs. She's 55, inherited more Silicon Valley money than she could spend in 5 lifetimes, and appointed herself Queen of Pine Valley Estates HOA. Think of the most entitled customer you've ever dealt with, give her unlimited money and legal authority over your property, then add a doctorate in passive aggression. Vivian moved here from California 5 years ago and immediately started treating working families like we were personally tanking her investment portfolio. Her lakefront mansion cost $2.8 million, more money than most families see in 3 generations. She's got perfectly manicured everything: lawn maintained by weekly landscaping crews, nails done religiously at the spa, and an attitude sharp enough to cut diamond. The woman measures neighbors' grass height with a laser level and times noise complaints to the exact millisecond. She once called code enforcement because my truck was parked 3 inches over my property line. 3 inches. With photographic evidence and a measuring tape like she was documenting a crime scene for federal prosecutors. Pine Valley Estates HOA consists of 47 homes with $400 monthly dues that somehow never seem to improve anything except Vivian's sense of superiority. Most residents are retirees and California transplants, creating this weird tension between original locals like my family and newcomers who think rural Colorado should look like suburban San Francisco. Our first confrontation happened 3 weeks after I moved into Grandpa's cabin. I was fixing his old fishing dock when she materialized. "We need to discuss community standards, Mr. Rodriguez," she said, my last name dripping with disdain. "What standards?" "That fishing disrupts our meditation. This aesthetic conflicts with our property values." I explained this was inherited property, predating her HOA by 8 years. Her smile went Arctic. "We'll see about that," she said, and I knew the war had officially begun, and she absolutely did see about that. Vivian's opening gambit arrived 3 days later via certified mail, the kind of envelope that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. Cease and desist fishing activities blazed across the top like I was running some kind of underwater meth lab. The letter claimed my lake was a common area amenity per HOA covenants and threatened $500 daily fines for violations. I had 72 hours to comply or face legal action. I stared at that letter sitting at my kitchen table, the smell of morning coffee mixing with the metallic taste of pure rage. Common area amenity? This lake had been in my family since before she was born. But here's the thing about people like Vivian. They count on you being too intimidated or too broke to fight back. Wrong veteran. Wrong fight. My first counterattack was a trip to the county recorder's office, which smells like a combination of musty basement and bureaucratic despair. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while I dug through property records dating back to the 1980s. The clerk, Dorothy, had been there since the Carter administration and remembered when my grandfather bought the place. "That woman's been in here 3 times trying to find some loophole," Dorothy said, spreading out the original survey maps with the reverence of someone handling historical documents. "Keeps asking about community water rights and shared access easements." I told her the same thing I'm telling you. This lake sits entirely within your property boundaries. The 1987 survey was crystal clear. Every inch of that lake belonged to me, with water rights included in perpetuity. The HOA wasn't even formed until 1995, 8 years after Grandpa's purchase. They had about as much claim to my lake as I had to Vivian's wine cellar or her husband's golf clubs. Dorothy pulled out another file that made my day. "Your grandfather's attorney blocked 3 separate attempts to force a sale in the 1990s. Developers wanted this land bad. Same law firm that represented him is still in business across the street." I remembered my military legal training about documentation and evidence gathering. In Afghanistan, we learned that good intelligence wins wars before the first shot gets fired. Every patrol started with knowing the terrain, understanding the enemy, and having an exit strategy. Time to apply those lessons to suburban warfare. I walked out with a folder full of ammunition and enough confidence to call Vivian's bluff that same evening. Her emergency HOA board meeting, scheduled with exactly 4 hours' notice, felt like walking into an ambush. I arrived at the community center to find 12 residents plus her husband Richard, who looked like he'd been marinated in disappointment since retirement from banking. The room smelled like burnt coffee and barely contained hostility. Someone had set up folding chairs in a semicircle facing a projection screen, like we were about to watch a documentary about my supposed crimes. Vivian's PowerPoint presentation, Property Rights versus Community Standards, included aerial photos showing my alleged encroachment, selectively quoted HOA bylaws, and a petition signed by 23 homeowners supporting a fishing ban. She'd even created charts and graphs showing supposed noise pollution levels from my fishing activities. The whole performance was designed to overwhelm me with official-sounding legal language and community pressure. I sat quietly in the back row, taking photos of every slide and recording everything on my phone. Living in Colorado for 3 years had taught me about their one-party consent law. I could record conversations without telling anyone, unlike some states where everyone has to agree. Useful knowledge when dealing with HOA dictators who think they're above documentation. Board members nodded along like trained seals, taking notes and making serious faces, while Vivian presented her case for why my constitutional property rights should bow to her meditation schedule. The performance would have been comedy gold if my family's financial future wasn't hanging in the balance. After her dog and pony show, the board voted 4-1 to authorize appropriate legal action to resolve what they kept calling the fishing dispute. The lone dissenting vote came from Tom Morrison, a retired teacher who looked embarrassed by the whole proceeding. When they finished their kangaroo court session, I stood up calmly and delivered my response. "I'll be fishing tomorrow at sunrise. See you there." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. Vivian's face cycled through several interesting shades of red before settling on what I'd call apoplectic purple. In the parking lot afterward, gravel crunching under our feet in the cool evening air, Vivian approached with Richard lurking nearby like backup muscle she'd never actually need to use. "You seem like a reasonable man, Sebastian," she said, her voice dripping with false concern and practiced manipulation. "Let's work something out between neighbors. I'm prepared to grandfather you in for 2 hours of fishing per week. Dawn to 8 a.m. on weekends only. That's more than fair, don't you think? 2 hours per week, on my own property." The audacity was almost impressive. But here's what really shocked me. She actually believed she had the authority to make that offer. This wasn't just harassment. This was complete delusion about property rights. Her generous compromise revealed she genuinely thought she controlled my inheritance. I looked her straight in the eye. "I don't negotiate over what's already mine." The war was officially declared, and she just handed me perfect evidence of her overreach. Vivian's legal warfare began the next morning with a threatening letter that could have choked a horse. Her HOA attorney had crafted a 47-page legal brief that read like a doctoral thesis on creative property theft, complete with footnotes and case citations that probably cost $500 per page to research and compile. The letter claimed adverse possession and prescriptive easement theories, basically arguing that because other people had looked at my lake over the years, they'd somehow earned legal rights to it. I'd seen this exact tactic in Afghanistan when local civilians claimed ownership of military equipment just because they'd walked past it on patrol routes. Same energy, different uniform, equally ridiculous logic that would make any rational judge laugh. The legal fees demand hit a staggering $15,000 plus immediate cessation of all fishing activities forever. But here's where Vivian made her first major tactical error. She CC'd the entire neighborhood on this nuclear legal threat. Suddenly, every single resident of Pine Valley Estates knew she was actively trying to bankrupt a disabled veteran over peaceful fishing rights. The move was designed for maximum public humiliation and social pressure, but it backfired like a defective grenade exploding in her own bunker. I continued my sunrise fishing routine with military precision, documenting every single session with time-stamped photos and detailed weather notes. My phone became a mobile surveillance device, carefully recording the increasing circus of accidental dog walkers who mysteriously materialized from nowhere whenever I cast a fishing line. These weren't casual morning strollers taking leisurely walks. They appeared with the suspicious coordination of a synchronized swimming team performing underwater espionage. Vivian's security cameras, which had been properly pointed at her own expensive property for 5 solid years, suddenly swiveled toward my modest dock like robotic stalkers, suffering from severe separation anxiety. I methodically counted 6 different camera angles, all focused exclusively on my peaceful morning activities. The woman had systematically transformed her luxurious lakefront mansion into a high-tech surveillance command center dedicated entirely to documenting my harmless communion with local fish populations. The community pressure campaign exploded across multiple social media fronts simultaneously. Anonymous flyers appeared on car windshields overnight. "Selfish neighbor threatens our peaceful community." Nextdoor app posts multiplied exponentially like viral social media comments about the aggressive newcomer who stubbornly refused to respect established community harmony and traditional neighborhood values. The coordinated digital pile-on felt suspiciously organized, like someone was methodically running a full-scale propaganda operation directly from her temperature-controlled wine cellar. But something completely unexpected happened during this intense psychological assault campaign. 3 different homeowners approached me directly with genuine support and valuable insider information, suddenly revealing that Vivian's supposedly united community front was actually more fragile than expensive imported porcelain sitting on unstable shelves during earthquake season. Tom Morrison, the respected retired teacher who'd courageously voted against legal action during the kangaroo court meeting, stopped by my humble cabin with intelligence that smelled exactly like victory brewing slowly in his steaming coffee cup. "She's systematically done this exact same thing before," he said, settling comfortably into a weathered chair on my small porch with the weary facial expression of someone who'd unfortunately watched too many decent neighbors get completely bulldozed by bureaucratic tyranny. The Henderson family got hit with expensive violations for their American flag being allegedly too prominent. The Martinez family faced substantial fines for their children's playground being supposedly aesthetically inconsistent. There's definitely a clear documented pattern here specifically targeting anyone who doesn't automatically bow down to Queen Vivian's arbitrary royal decrees. This obviously wasn't really about fishing regulations or legitimate community standards enforcement. This was systematic intimidation specifically targeting working families, military veterans, and basically anyone who didn't perfectly fit her narrow vision of suburban perfection. She'd successfully weaponized the entire HOA system into her personal enforcement army. Then came the criminal sabotage attempt that crossed every legal and moral line imaginable. I arrived for my regular morning fishing session to find my grandfather's dock completely destroyed. 2 support posts loosened with mechanical precision, decking boards pried up like someone had personally declared war on innocent wooden planks. Fresh tool marks brutally scarred the weathered lumber that had peacefully weathered 40 harsh Colorado winters. Metal shavings glittered in the morning grass like evidence at a serious federal crime scene. The lingering smell of motor oil hung heavily in the normally pine-scented mountain air, telling me they'd used expensive power tools and worked extremely fast. But amateur criminals always make rookie mistakes. My neighbor's security camera had captured everything in perfect high-definition detail. Richard's pickup truck creeping past at exactly 2:17 a.m., headlights completely off, then returning precisely 40 minutes later with a suspicious toolbox rattling loudly in his truck bed. Officer Martinez arrived within 1 hour, took extensive photos, and reviewed footage with growing professional anger. This is clearly criminal vandalism, and it's not the first suspicious report from this specific neighborhood. The hypocrisy was becoming their signature move, and I was building comprehensive documentation of their contradictions. The media manipulation began 2 days after the dock vandalism hit the police reports. Local newspaper headlines screamed, "HOA battles property line dispute with veteran." The article painted me as some kind of uncooperative troublemaker, while giving Vivian enough quote space to run for mayor. Some individuals simply refuse to understand that community living requires compromise and respect for established standards, she told the reporter, standing in front of her mansion like she was accepting a humanitarian award. The photo showed my modest cabin in the background, deliberately contrasted with her manicured paradise to tell a story about property values versus practicality. Online comments became a battleground. Vivian's supporters called me entitled and disrespectful. But something beautiful happened. Locals who actually knew my family's history started fighting back. Stories emerged about my grandfather's contributions to the community, my military service, and the reality of what this harassment was doing to my parents' medical treatment. That's when my private investigator's report arrived with information that changed everything. "You're going to want to sit down for this," Jake Morrison said, spreading documents across my kitchen table like evidence in a murder trial. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the scent of impending justice. Vivian Blackwood had a history. Her previous HOA in California had faced a federal lawsuit for selective enforcement and discrimination patterns. Complaints alleged she'd systematically targeted military families, working-class residents, and anyone who didn't meet her social standards. She'd resigned quietly and moved to Colorado immediately after the lawsuit was filed. "She's not just a control freak," Jake explained. "She's a repeat offender who found a new playground." The California case files revealed identical tactics: anonymous complaints, excessive documentation, coordinated harassment campaigns, and property damage targeting non-compliant residents. 3 families had received settlements totaling $400,000 after proving systematic discrimination. Armed with this intelligence, I prepared for Vivian's next escalation, which came faster than a Colorado thunderstorm. The actual lawsuit landed on my doorstep via process server. A kid who looked like he'd rather be delivering pizza. HOA versus Rodriguez, seeking injunctive relief and $25,000 in damages for ongoing property value destruction and community disruption. Local TV news picked up the story within hours. "Fishing rights fight divides mountain community" aired during the dinner hour, complete with footage of me peacefully casting while Vivian stood nearby looking like a suburban dictator explaining why fishing was destroying Western civilization. The interview footage was pure gold. Reporter asked Vivian about property rights, and her response revealed everything wrong with HOA power structures. "Some people simply don't understand community standards," she said with that practiced eye roll that made viewers want to cancel their cable subscriptions. When pressed about my veteran status and family history, she actually said certain types of people don't naturally fit into upscale communities. The comment went viral locally within 6 hours. #Let Sebastian Fish started trending on social media. And suddenly, Vivian's carefully constructed narrative crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. 3 more neighbors approached me with support after seeing the interview. Stories poured out about Vivian's reign of terror, fines for Christmas decorations, violations for children's toys, complaints about working vehicles parked in driveways. The pattern was unmistakable. She was systematically targeting anyone who reminded her that real people lived in her fantasy community. But Vivian doubled down with a move that revealed her complete delusion about public relations. She organized something called the Community Standards Patrol, board members taking shifts monitoring my property like prison guards watching dangerous inmates. They set up folding chairs 50 feet from my dock, brought clipboards, cameras, and thermos bottles like they were conducting scientific research on the environmental impact of fishing line. The visual was absolutely perfect for my purposes. Here was the HOA president organizing surveillance teams to monitor a disabled veteran fishing peacefully on his own property. Every morning, I'd wave cheerfully at my audience while they documented my heinous crimes against suburbia. I continued my normal routine, completely ignoring their theatrical surveillance operation. Military training had taught me that showing fear or anger only encouraged bullies. Instead, I offered them coffee and fishing tips, treating them like welcome guests rather than hostile invaders. "Catch anything interesting today?" I'd ask the clipboard brigade, holding up whatever fish I'd landed. Their uncomfortable expressions suggested they hadn't planned for friendly interaction with their surveillance target. My documentation efforts revealed they were trespassing on county easement land. The exact spots where they'd set up their surveillance chairs belonged to the county, not the HOA or any private property owner. I quietly filed the appropriate complaints with county enforcement. But the real breakthrough came when I discovered a critical survey error that would change everything. County records showed measurement discrepancies in multiple property lines throughout Pine Valley estates. The HOA's boundary markers were off by 15 feet in several locations, meaning Vivian's prized rose garden extended onto county land, and her expensive dock actually sat on my property. The woman who'd been harassing me about property rights violations was herself in violation of property laws. Her surveillance operation wasn't just harassment, it was trespassing by someone whose own property boundaries were illegally positioned. That evening, I received the phone call I'd been hoping for since this nightmare started. "Mr. Rodriguez, this is Frank Morrison from Morrison, Klein & Associates. I represented your grandfather's estate and I think it's time we discussed your inheritance more thoroughly. There are aspects of your grandfather's legal arrangements we never fully explored, and given current circumstances, I believe you need to understand the full scope of what he left you." The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, and I had a feeling everything was about to change. Vivian's Community Standards Patrol would soon learn they'd been monitoring someone with more legal firepower than they'd ever imagined. Frank Morrison's law office smelled like leather-bound books and decades of legal victories. At 73, he'd practiced law in Pine Valley longer than most residents had been alive, and his file cabinets contained secrets that could reshape our entire community. "Your grandfather was a very thorough man, Sebastian," he said, pulling out a thick folder marked Future Considerations, Rodriguez Estate. The yellow documents inside looked like they'd been waiting decades for this exact moment. The historical bombshell hit me like an avalanche of legal vindication. My grandfather's original 1987 land purchase included water rights to the entire watershed feeding into my lake. Not just surface water, underground springs, seasonal runoff, and 3 separate water sources that originated deep on my property. He'd specifically bought this land to control water access, understanding that Colorado's first-in-time, first-in-right water law would make these rights incredibly valuable. "Your grandfather predicted water scarcity would make this property worth millions," Morrison explained, spreading out geological surveys and water rights documentation. He spent years researching water law and positioning this estate to benefit future generations. But that wasn't the nuclear revelation. Morrison pulled out a second folder that made my blood pressure spike with excitement. There's more, much more. Hidden in grandfather's legal archives were documents that could destroy Vivian's entire power structure. When Pine Valley Estates HOA was formed in 1995, they'd violated multiple state requirements for legal establishment. Missing signatures, improper notifications, and boundary disputes that were never resolved. The HOA formation documents contain fatal flaws, Morrison explained with the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting years to use this information. Your grandfather documented everything because he knew they'd eventually try to claim authority over his property. The water rights alone were valued at $1.2 million due to Colorado's increasing water scarcity. But the HOA formation irregularities meant their entire legal authority could be challenged and potentially dissolved. Morrison showed me the smoking gun: financial records proving systematic mismanagement and possible embezzlement. Board members had been paying themselves consulting fees for years, using HOA funds for personal projects, and hiding expenses from annual reports. If we file a quiet title action combined with HOA dissolution proceedings, we could eliminate their authority entirely while securing your water rights permanently, Morrison said. But here's where the story took an even darker turn. Morrison revealed that Alpine Resort Development's $6.8 million offer hadn't been coincidental. Vivian had been secretly negotiating with developers for months, trying to position herself as a power broker who could deliver community water access rights. She'd been planning to use HOA authority to force my sale, then profit from facilitating the development deal. She destroyed your development opportunity to create her own, Morrison explained. Classic interference with contractual relations plus conspiracy to defraud. The investigation went deeper. Vivian had been researching my property for over a year, trying to find legal vulnerabilities she could exploit. Her harassment campaign wasn't personal vindictiveness. It was calculated economic warfare designed to force my sale so she could control the development process. She knew exactly what she was doing, Morrison said. Every harassment incident was designed to create legal grounds for claiming your property was problematic, making it easier to force a sale. Morrison's recommendation was strategic patience. We have enough evidence to destroy her legally, financially, and personally, but rushing into court gives her opportunities to hide evidence and rally support. Better to let her dig deeper while we prepare the perfect case. The timeline was 6 weeks to build an ironclad legal foundation, then go public with everything simultaneously. Quiet title action, HOA dissolution, civil rights lawsuit, and criminal referrals all filed at once. She's about to learn why your grandfather chose this land and this legal team, Morrison said with a smile that could have powered the entire valley. I walked out of that office understanding that my grandfather hadn't just left me property, he'd left me the tools to protect it and the wisdom to use them effectively. Vivian had picked a fight with the wrong family, and she was about to discover that some battles can't be won with harassment and intimidation. The war was about to shift dramatically in my favor. Morrison's legal strategy session felt like military briefing for the most important mission of my life. We spread maps, documents, and evidence across his conference table like generals planning the decisive battle of a long campaign. Water rights enforcement action could shut down their lake access entirely, Morrison explained, pointing to geological surveys that proved my springs fed their entire community water system. It's the nuclear option, legally bulletproof but guaranteed to make enemies of everyone. The decision was strategic restraint. Keep that weapon in reserve while building a public case that would turn the community against Vivian before we destroyed her legally. Let her escalate while we gather evidence, Morrison advised. Every harassment incident strengthens our civil rights case and justifies punitive damages. My systematic intelligence gathering operation began immediately. 3 decades of military experience had taught me that information wins wars, and suburban combat required the same strategic thinking as overseas operations. Community conversations revealed the scope of Vivian's corruption. 8 homeowners currently faced pending violations, all targeting blue-collar families or minorities. Tom Morrison introduced me to the Martinez family, whose playground equipment had been deemed aesthetically inconsistent despite meeting all safety codes. She charged us $2,000 in fines for having a swing set, Maria Martinez explained over coffee that tasted like shared frustration. Same swing set the HOA approved 3 years ago when the previous board ran things. The Henderson family's story was even worse. Their American flag had been measured with laser levels and found 2 inches too prominent, according to newly created guidelines that applied only to their property. Financial investigation revealed systematic corruption that would make federal prosecutors salivate. HOA budgets showed legal fees consuming 40% of annual dues, with most money going to harassment campaigns against residents who challenged Vivian's authority. Reserve funds had been depleted by her enhancement projects that somehow only enhanced her property values. Several homeowners were behind on dues due to excessive assessment fees for questionable community improvements. The pattern was clear. Vivian was bleeding the HOA financially while using their money to fund personal vendettas. My technical preparation involved installing a professional-grade security system that could document everything happening on my property. Motion sensors, night vision cameras, and audio recording equipment powered by solar panels ensured continuous operation regardless of weather or sabotage attempts. Hidden camera angles captured neighboring properties too, documenting their surveillance activities while protecting my own privacy. Every approach to my property was monitored and recorded with time-stamped evidence that would hold up in court. Coalition building accelerated after the first informal coffee meeting with sympathetic neighbors. Stories emerged that revealed Vivian's systematic targeting of anyone who didn't match her vision of suburban perfection. She measured my fence with a laser level, retired teacher Janet Williams said, laughing at the absurdity while clearly still angry about the harassment. Claimed it was 3/4 of an inch too tall. 3/4 of an inch. Veteran John Sawyer shared his own story. She tried to ban my flag display for being too prominent, then attempted to fine me for parking my work truck in my own driveway. The pattern was unmistakable. Systematic targeting of military families, working-class residents, and anyone whose lifestyle didn't match her California standards. My DIY legal education involved researching Colorado HOA law extensively, discovering requirements for standing that Vivian couldn't possibly meet. HOAs must prove actual financial harm to justify property restrictions, and no evidence existed that fishing caused any measurable damage to community assets. Documentation strategy became my full-time obsession. Daily fishing logs with weather conditions, water temperature, and catch records. Professional water quality testing proved the lake remained pristine despite my supposedly destructive activities. Video testimonials from neighbors supporting my fishing rights created a documentary of community support. The public relations preparation involved reaching out to the journalist who'd covered our story, offering exclusive access to grandfather's historical documents and Morrison's legal analysis. The reveal strategy was designed for maximum community impact when the time came. Social media campaigns highlighting HOA overreach began organically as more neighbors shared their own harassment stories. The narrative was shifting from difficult neighbor disputes, community standards, to corruption and discrimination disguised as community management. Physical trap elements were positioned strategically around the property. No trespassing signs marked exact boundary lines according to professional surveys. Floating buoys marked water rights boundaries in the lake itself, creating clear visual evidence of property ownership. Emergency contact systems connected me directly to Morrison's office for immediate legal response to any harassment incidents. Every violation of my rights would be documented and immediately reported to appropriate authorities. Financial counter-strike research involved investigating HOA insurance policies and coverage limits. Board members faced personal liability exposure for civil rights violations, and most had insufficient assets to cover potential judgments. I calculated damages from lost property use, emotional distress, and medical expenses related to stress-induced health problems. The foundation for punitive damages was building based on Vivian's discriminatory patterns and systematic harassment campaigns. Psychological preparation involved understanding Vivian's need for control and public validation. Morrison predicted she'd escalate when faced with organized resistance, potentially making mistakes that would provide perfect evidence for our legal case. "She can't help herself," Morrison explained. "People like this always overreach when they feel threatened. Our job is to document everything while staying completely legal ourselves." Timeline coordination established clear phases: silent evidence gathering, community coalition building, then public revelation with simultaneous legal action. Contingency plans covered early escalation scenarios and emergency responses. Technical knowledge sharing helped neighbors document their own harassment experiences. I taught them photography techniques for HOA violations, shared contact information for affordable legal assistance, and created template letters for challenging improper fines. The foundation was set for the most decisive confrontation of this suburban war. Vivian's desperation move came exactly when Morrison predicted it would, when she realized her harassment campaign was backfiring and community support was shifting toward my family. The emergency HOA meeting announcement arrived with exactly 24 hours notice, which violated their own bylaws requiring 72-hour minimum notification for special assessments. The agenda contained one massive item: special assessment for legal defense fund, $20,500 per household. Vivian was attempting to force every neighbor to fund her personal legal war against my family's property rights. I arrived at the community center to find the meeting packed beyond capacity. 35 residents crammed into a room designed for 20, with tension so thick you could have cut it with my grandfather's fishing knife. The smell of burnt coffee mixed with barely contained anger created an atmosphere that felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Vivian had prepared for battle with printed talking points, legal precedents, and a presentation explaining why my fishing activities threatened everyone's property values. She stood at the front of the room, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most families' monthly grocery budget. This assessment is necessary to protect our community from individuals who refuse to respect established standards, she announced with the authority of someone who genuinely believed she ruled this neighborhood. Legal action requires adequate funding, and every homeowner benefits from proper enforcement. But my supporters had come prepared for this fight. Tom Morrison stood up first. I've lived here for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this harassment campaign. We're being asked to fund legal action against a veteran whose family has been part of this community longer than our HOA has existed. Maria Martinez followed with her family's story about playground equipment fines. Janet Williams shared the laser-measured fence violation. John Sawyer described flag display harassment. A pattern of systematic targeting became undeniable as resident after resident shared their experiences. The room divided exactly as Morrison had predicted. Vivian's supporters, mostly recent California transplants with expensive homes, sat on one side nodding along with her talking points. Long-term residents and working families occupied the other side, sharing stories about Vivian's overreach and discrimination. When the vote came, the result shocked everyone. 23-22 against the special assessment. Vivian's iron grip on community control had finally slipped, and her reaction was immediate and revealing. "This is unacceptable," she declared, face flushing with anger that made her look like an overripe tomato. "Some of you clearly don't understand the financial implications of letting property values decline due to inappropriate activities." The next morning brought retaliation that crossed every line of reasonable HOA authority. A 6-person inspection team arrived at my property at 7 a.m. with clipboards, measuring devices, and an attitude that suggested they were documenting war crimes rather than checking fence heights. They spent 3 hours measuring everything: grass length, deck railings, mailbox positioning, even the angle of my satellite dish. The team generated 14 separate violation notices in a single visit, more violations than most homeowners receive in a decade. Each citation was for minor infractions that had never been enforced against other properties: grass 2 inches above regulation height, deck staining inconsistent with community standards, and my personal favorite, unauthorized fishing equipment storage for keeping my rod in my own garage. I filmed the entire inspection from my porch, offering coffee to the team and asking specific questions about the regulations they were enforcing. Several inspectors admitted they'd never seen these particular rules enforced anywhere else in the community, and one quietly suggested I lawyer up because this level of scrutiny wasn't normal. The sabotage escalation revealed Vivian's complete loss of rational thinking. My trail cameras captured nighttime vandalism attempts that looked like a suburban version of guerrilla warfare. Richard loosening dock bolts with an electric drill at 2:30 a.m. Board treasurer Patricia Williams pouring dish soap into the lake near my fishing area, apparently hoping to create some kind of environmental contamination evidence. The footage provided crystal clear evidence of a coordinated harassment campaign that would make federal prosecutors salivate. Multiple HOA board members engaging in criminal activity while using their official positions to harass a resident who'd challenged their authority. But Vivian's legal strategy was collapsing faster than her community support. Her first attorney had withdrawn from the case, citing irreconcilable differences with client management style. Lawyers speak for, "This woman is completely insane and will destroy my professional reputation." The second attorney declined representation after reviewing the evidence, particularly my documentation of Vivian's discrimination patterns and criminal behavior by board members. Desperate for legal representation, Vivian hired an expensive Denver firm at $650 per hour, burning through HOA reserves faster than a wildfire consumes dry timber. Legal costs had already exceeded $30,000 with no trial date scheduled and no realistic prospect of victory. Her smear campaign reached new levels of desperation and revealed her complete disconnect from reality. Anonymous neighborhood newsletters appeared overnight. The truth about our fishing problem. The publication contained fabricated claims about environmental damage, doctored photographs showing alleged lake contamination, and completely false quotes attributed to environmental authorities. The newsletter was distributed to every mailbox, including local businesses, apparently hoping to create broader community pressure against my family. But the fabrications were so obvious that most recipients immediately recognized them as propaganda. My response was strategic and devastating. I provided real photographs and water quality documentation to every neighbor, along with copies of the professional environmental report showing pristine lake conditions. The local veterinarian who regularly tested our water for livestock use provided written confirmation that fish populations were healthy and thriving. The local environmental group not only endorsed my sustainable fishing practices, but published a statement supporting traditional fishing rights and condemning harassment of responsible anglers. Community pressure against Vivian intensified dramatically. 3 more board members resigned, citing the increasingly hostile environment and their unwillingness to participate in harassment campaigns. The HOA management company threatened to terminate their contract due to legal liability concerns. Property management insurance companies began questioning coverage for harassment lawsuits, particularly after reviewing evidence of systematic targeting and criminal behavior by board members. Vivian's final gambit revealed her complete desperation and poor judgment. She attempted to have my truck towed from my own driveway, claiming it violated commercial vehicle restrictions, despite my firefighter license plates clearly identifying it as a personal vehicle owned by a public safety professional. The tow truck driver refused the job after verifying property ownership and reviewing the obviously frivolous complaint. But her mistake provided perfect evidence of harassment escalation and abuse of authority that would strengthen our civil case immeasurably. The stage was set for her complete downfall. Vivian's panic response to losing community control was filing an emergency restraining order that could have been written by someone having a complete psychological breakdown. The legal document claimed I was threatening community safety with aggressive fishing practices and requested a court order prohibiting any lake access until the dispute was resolved. Reading that restraining order request felt like discovering someone had nominated me for an award in creative fiction writing. According to Vivian's sworn statement, my fishing activities constituted intimidation tactics designed to terrorize neighbors and posed imminent threats to community peace and safety. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the day before our planned charity fishing tournament. Timing that wasn't coincidental. Vivian was attempting to use court orders to shut down a community event that would demonstrate broad support for my property rights. Morrison and I walked into that courtroom with 3 filing boxes of evidence and the confidence of people who'd prepared for this exact battle. Judge Patricia Melanie had been on the bench for 12 years and had a reputation for cutting through legal nonsense with surgical precision. Morrison presented our complete property documentation like a masterclass in real estate law. Original deeds, water rights certificates, survey maps, and historical records that proved my ownership beyond any reasonable doubt. The evidence was so comprehensive that Vivian's attorney looked embarrassed to be arguing against basic property rights. "Your Honor, we're trying to protect community standards and property values," Vivian's attorney said, apparently hoping legal precedent had been replaced by homeowner association bylaws sometime in the past century. Judge Melanie's response was swift and devastating. "This appears to be harassment disguised as legal action," she said, reviewing Vivian's restraining order request with the expression of someone examining evidence of criminal stupidity. "The petitioner seeks to prohibit property use by the actual owner based on complaints that have no basis in law or fact." The restraining order was dismissed with prejudicial language that basically called it frivolous litigation. Judge Melanie ordered the HOA to pay my legal fees, $8,500, and issued a warning about future court abuse that made Vivian's attorney visibly wince. "Any further attempts to use this court for harassment purposes will result in sanctions and possible criminal referral," Judge Melanie announced, making eye contact with Vivian like she was memorizing her face for future reference. The community reaction to the court ruling was immediate and decisive. An emergency HOA meeting was called that evening to discuss the judge's ruling and mounting legal costs. I attended with Morrison and a small army of supporters who'd grown tired of Vivian's reign of terror. The motion to remove Vivian as president gained support from residents who'd finally recognized her harassment campaigns were destroying community relationships and draining HOA finances. Even some of her previous supporters began questioning the wisdom of endless legal battles that were costing thousands of dollars with no prospect of victory. But Vivian refused to step down gracefully. "I will not be intimidated by individuals who refuse to respect community standards," she declared, standing at the front of the room like a general addressing troops before a suicide mission. "This board has a responsibility to protect property values and maintain established guidelines regardless of personal criticism." Her refusal to acknowledge reality triggered mass resignations from the board. Within 1 week, 4 of the 5 remaining board members had submitted resignation letters, citing their unwillingness to participate in harassment activities and potential legal liability for civil rights violations. The HOA became completely dysfunctional, unable to conduct business or make decisions with insufficient board membership. Property management companies refused to renew contracts due to legal liability concerns, leaving basic maintenance and financial management in chaos. But Vivian's most desperate gambit was yet to come. The night before our charity fishing tournament, my trail cameras captured the most brazen criminal activity yet. Coordinated vandalism involving multiple perpetrators working with power tools and vehicles to damage my property as extensively as possible. Dock supports were cut completely through with reciprocating saws. Fishing signs were destroyed with sledgehammers. My driveway was blocked with concrete barriers that required heavy equipment to position. The destruction was systematic and thorough, clearly designed to prevent the tournament and intimidate community members who'd expressed support for my family. But criminals who panic make mistakes that provide perfect evidence for prosecutors. The camera footage captured everything in high-definition detail. Vivian directing the vandalism operation while Richard and 2 other board members carried out the destruction. License plates, faces, voices, and criminal activity were all documented with the clarity of a crime scene investigation. I called 911 immediately, and Officer Martinez arrived with backup and a detective who specialized in property crimes. They reviewed the footage with growing anger and immediately issued arrest warrants for vandalism, criminal mischief, and conspiracy charges. "This is systematic harassment that's escalated to serious criminal behavior," Detective Sarah Rodriguez explained while taking statements. "The evidence is overwhelming, and we'll be filing multiple felony charges." Media attention exploded overnight. Local TV stations picked up the arrest story with footage of Vivian being led away in handcuffs while trying to hide her face from cameras. HOA war escalates to criminal charges became the lead story on 3 different news channels, with viral social media coverage spreading the story across the entire region. National attention from HOA reform advocates and civil rights organizations followed within days. Our story became a symbol of HOA overreach and the need for legal protections against harassment by neighborhood associations. The charity fishing tournament proceeded as scheduled despite the vandalism damage. 47 participants, including families with children, attended the event, with local game wardens providing educational presentations about sustainable fishing practices and water conservation. Food trucks, live music, and charitable fundraising booths created a festival atmosphere that proved community events could bring people together rather than divide them. Perfect weather and crystal-clear lake conditions provided abundant fish for everyone, especially children who were learning to cast for the first time. The sight of kids laughing and learning while surrounded by adults sharing fishing stories and conservation knowledge was exactly the peaceful community activity my grandfather had envisioned for this land. Vivian arrived during the tournament with private security guards and a bullhorn, apparently hoping to disrupt the charitable event and create negative publicity for my family. She demanded access to what she still called the community lake, despite court rulings and criminal charges pending against her. Her final public meltdown was captured by multiple cameras and witnessed by dozens of families with children. "This is still my community, and I will not be driven out by people who don't belong here," she screamed through the bullhorn while children watched in confusion and parents moved to shield them from her increasingly unhinged behavior. The private security guards refused to trespass when shown property boundaries and court documents, leaving Vivian alone with her bullhorn and rapidly deteriorating grip on reality. Her complete breakdown in front of families and media cameras became the defining image of HOA overreach run completely amok. The Pine Valley Community Center had never seen anything like the crowd that packed every seat for our emergency town hall meeting. Local TV crews positioned cameras while newspaper reporters took notes, and curious residents filled aisles and doorways to witness what everyone knew would be the final showdown in our HOA war. Judge Morrison had volunteered to moderate as a neutral party, lending judicial gravitas to proceedings that felt more like a war crimes tribunal than a neighborhood dispute resolution. The smell of nervous anticipation mixed with burnt coffee and the weight of community judgment that had been building for months. Morrison called the meeting to order and immediately presented the forensic audit results that would destroy Vivian's empire completely. Ladies and gentlemen, the independent financial investigation has revealed systematic embezzlement and fraud totaling $47,000 in stolen HOA funds over 3 years, Morrison announced to gasps and murmurs throughout the packed room. The detailed breakdown was devastating. Unauthorized legal fees paid to Vivian's brother-in-law's firm, personal expenses charged to HOA accounts, family member contracts for services never performed, and creative accounting that would make professional criminals proud. But the financial crimes were just the beginning. Morrison displayed evidence of systematic harassment campaigns targeting military families, working-class residents, and anyone who dared to challenge Vivian's authority. Video footage, recorded conversations, and documented violations revealed a pattern of discrimination that violated federal civil rights laws. When I took the podium to address the community that had been torn apart by one woman's need for control, the room fell silent enough to hear mountain winds outside. "I never wanted this fight," I began, looking out at faces of neighbors who'd been forced to choose sides in a conflict that should never have happened. "I inherited my grandfather's land with the responsibility to protect it and honor his legacy. I never imagined that peaceful fishing would trigger a war." The video evidence of vandalism played on the large projection screen, showing Vivian directing criminal destruction of my property while spouting justifications about community standards and property values. Watching her instruct grown men to destroy a disabled veteran's dock with power tools created a silence in the room that felt like collective shame. Property documents displayed on screen showed clear ownership of the lake and surrounding land, with water rights that predated the HOA by 8 years. The legal case for my fishing rights was so overwhelming that even Vivian's remaining supporters looked embarrassed by the obvious harassment campaign they'd enabled. But the smoking gun evidence was yet to come. Morrison played recordings of Vivian instructing board members to make life difficult for people who don't fit our community standards. Text messages between board members discussed strategies for getting rid of undesirable elements and coordinating harassment campaigns. Email chains revealed planning for systematic discrimination, with specific targeting of military families and working-class residents who didn't match Vivian's vision of suburban perfection. The evidence read like a manual for running illegal intimidation campaigns while hiding behind legitimate authority. Bank records showing personal use of HOA credit cards for spa treatments, restaurant meals, and shopping expeditions were displayed with receipts and timestamps that proved systematic theft of community funds intended for legitimate maintenance and improvements. The community's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Standing ovation erupted when Morrison finished presenting evidence of my family's legal rights and documented harassment. Multiple homeowners stood to share their own stories of intimidation, excessive fines, and discriminatory enforcement that had made their lives miserable under Vivian's reign of terror. Calls for criminal prosecution grew louder as residents realized the scope of financial theft and systematic harassment that had been disguised as community management. Local police chief confirmed ongoing investigations and promised thorough prosecution of all criminal behavior. Vivian's final stand was a masterpiece of self-destruction. Against her attorney's frantic advice, she demanded the microphone to defend her actions and justify the harassment campaign that had torn the community apart. Her statement was a rambling defense of protecting investments and maintaining appropriate standards for people who understand quality community living. "Some individuals simply don't belong in upscale neighborhoods," she declared, doubling down on discriminatory statements while being recorded by multiple news cameras. Property values and community standards must be protected from elements that don't appreciate refined living. The explicit discrimination in her public statement provided perfect evidence for federal civil rights prosecutions and guaranteed maximum punitive damages in our civil lawsuit. Community reaction was swift and decisive. Boos and angry shouts erupted throughout the room as residents expressed outrage at her blatant discrimination and financial theft. Parents covered their children's ears while Vivian continued digging her legal grave deeper with every word. Local police chief announced criminal charges during the meeting: embezzlement, fraud, harassment, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. Federal prosecutors had been contacted regarding potential hate crime enhancements based on targeting military families and minorities. The legal hammer fell with devastating force. Civil lawsuit damages were calculated at $6.8 million, including punitive damages for systematic harassment and civil rights violations. Personal liability for all participating board members meant liens against their homes and financial ruin for anyone who'd enabled Vivian's crimes. Vivian's lakefront mansion would be sold immediately to satisfy legal judgments, with proceeds funding community restoration and victim compensation. Her reign of terror had finally ended, but the cost was her complete financial and social destruction. Media coverage exploded across multiple platforms. Justice Served, an HOA horror story, became trending news on social media, with our story symbolizing hope for homeowners facing similar harassment campaigns nationwide. HOA reform advocates used our case as proof that systematic change was needed to prevent future abuses. The visual triumph was captured in hundreds of photographs and videos. Professional drone footage of pristine lake conditions during our presentation proved no environmental damage from fishing activities. Time-lapse videos showed healthy ecosystem and abundant wildlife that thrived despite supposedly destructive fishing practices. Before and after shots demonstrated the positive community changes that had emerged from standing up to corruption and discrimination. My closing statement provided the mic drop moment that would be quoted in news coverage and social media for years. "My grandfather bought this land to preserve it for future generations," I said, looking directly at the cameras that would share this story with thousands of viewers. "Today we've preserved something more important than property. We've preserved our community's soul and proved that bullies cannot win when good people stand together." The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes, while Vivian sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that her war was over and justice had prevailed. The settlement agreement was signed 6 weeks later in Morrison's office, with Vivian looking like she'd aged a decade during her fall from suburban royalty to criminal defendant. The $6.8 million judgment was structured as payments over 5 years, with immediate asset seizure ensuring my family would finally receive justice for months of systematic harassment. Vivian's lakefront mansion sold within 30 days to cover initial settlement payments, with proceeds funding community improvements that would benefit everyone rather than serving one person's ego. Watching her pack moving trucks while neighbors she'd terrorized looked on with satisfaction provided closure that felt like justice served with a side of poetic irony. Criminal plea agreements resulted in felony convictions for embezzlement and civil rights violations. Vivian received 3 years probation, community service, and permanent prohibition from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. Her husband Richard faced similar charges for participating in vandalism and harassment campaigns. The community transformation began immediately with new HOA board elections that reflected actual democratic values rather than autocratic control. Transparency reforms included monthly financial reports, open meeting policies, and discrimination prevention training that would prevent future abuses of authority. David Kim, a retired teacher and longtime resident, became the new HOA president with a mandate to rebuild community relationships that had been shattered by years of systematic harassment. His first official act was a formal apology to my family and a commitment to negotiate reasonable community guidelines that respected everyone's property rights. The conservation initiative that emerged from our victory honored my grandfather's vision while protecting the land for future generations. I donated a conservation easement worth $1.2 million that ensured perpetual protection from development while maintaining my family's water rights and fishing access. Educational signage installed around the lake explained watershed ecology and sustainable fishing practices, creating learning opportunities for children and adults who wanted to understand environmental stewardship. Partnership with the State Wildlife Department established monitoring programs that documented healthy fish populations and pristine water quality. Community benefit projects funded by settlement money transformed Pine Valley Estates from a divided neighborhood into a model for HOA governance and community cooperation. The $2 million youth center provided after-school programs, summer camps, and educational activities that brought families together rather than driving them apart. Free fishing equipment library and classes, taught children sustainable angling techniques while honoring the outdoor traditions that built Colorado communities. Annual fishing tournaments became beloved community events that celebrated our shared natural heritage and provided fundraising for local charities. Scholarship funds established in my grandfather's memory supported local high school students pursuing careers in environmental science, water management, and public service. The first recipients included children from families who'd been targeted by Vivian's harassment campaigns, proving that justice could create opportunities rather than just punishment. The national impact of our case exceeded anything I'd imagined when this war began. Pine Valley became a case study used by state legislators crafting HOA reform laws that protected homeowner rights from future harassment. Legal precedents established during our case provided templates for civil rights lawsuits against discriminatory neighborhood associations across the country. National HOA reform movements cited our victory as proof that systematic change was possible when communities stood together against corruption and discrimination. Law schools began teaching our case as an example of effective legal strategy combined with community organizing and media relations. Personal relationships that had been damaged during the conflict gradually healed as neighbors realized we'd all been victims of one person's need for control. Community potlucks replaced contentious board meetings, and neighborhood watch programs focused on helping rather than policing each other's activities. Property values increased significantly due to positive community spirit and national recognition of our successful fight against HOA overreach. Real estate agents marketed Pine Valley Estates as a community that had overcome internal division to create a model for democratic governance and neighbor cooperation. My personal healing accelerated once the stress of constant harassment disappeared, and my family could enjoy our inherited land without fear of legal threats or criminal sabotage. Morning fishing sessions returned to peaceful meditation rather than documented battles for basic property rights. The final morning of this story found me at Lakeside during sunrise, watching mist rise from water that reflected golden mountain light. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the nearby playground that had been built with settlement funds, while loons called across water that belonged to my family but welcomed the entire community. Coffee steamed from my thermos, mixing pine-scented mountain air with the satisfaction of justice served and community restored. Grandfather's spirit lived on in protected land, preserved water rights, and a neighborhood that had learned to value cooperation over control. The lesson was simple but powerful. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when the battle seems impossible. Bullies count on good people staying silent, but communities can overcome any challenge when they stand together for justice and mutual respect. My phone buzzed with a text from a homeowner in Texas whose HOA was using similar harassment tactics against military families. Our story had given him hope and a legal strategy for fighting back against systematic discrimination disguised as community management.